Stratford-upon-Avon is known to the world as the home of William Shakespeare, but it's also where I was born and bred. And I have many fond memories of this place. I've performed on the stage at the RSC, and I've even been to school discos at the school where Shakespeare once attended. And I've always been fascinated with Shakespeare, but I've never really known where he's quite come from. I've always had a curiosity about his parents and where they came from.
I'm on a mission to get to the bottom of it all, and I've brought Dan along to help me piece the whole story together and rediscover the people and places that shaped this genius.
Get exclusive documentaries and ad-free podcasts with top historians. Watch on your smart TV or mobile device by downloading the History Hit app.
Our quest begins at the place that's going to be our base throughout this Shakespearean adventure, Salford Hall.
So Dan, welcome to Warwickshire and welcome to Salford Hall.
This looks like, this looks pretty old. Would Shakespeare, I mean, this was here when Shakespeare was here, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, it was built in the 1470s as a guest house for the monks of Evesham Abbey. So yeah, Shakespeare may well have come here.
So it was a guest house back then, it's a guest house still.
It is, it's perhaps one of the oldest hotels in the area, you could say.
Amazing. It's the perfect place for our HQ.
A perfect place. Here we go, Dan. Here we are in the Stratford room.
Look at this. Classic.
Well, I've got some maps, and I've got some books, and I've got a lot of plays. So hopefully we're going to work out the story of Shakespeare's early years.
Shakespeare's greatest hits. This is you know this area so well, don't you?
Yeah, this is my neck of the woods, I have to say.
I don't know at all. So here we go, Stratford. And we've come to here, haven't we, to be sort of almost between these two great medieval centres. This is Shakespeare's country.
This is Shakespeare's country. So this is Stratford-upon-Avon, which obviously everyone knows as Shakespeare's home.
Yeah.
But actually, we've got Evesham down here to the west, southwest.
Yeah.
We've got Warwick on this side to the east, and then it goes up towards Coventry and Birmingham and that sort of place.
And Shakespeare would have been intimately familiar with this kind of landscape. He came from, was it some of his family came from a kind of farming background, this area, right?
Yeah, that's true. So if we look at this map,
Yeah.
so you can see there's Leamington Spa and Warwick and Stratford, and Shakespeare was from the area in between here, so kind of towards Henley and Arden, and that's the centre of the Arden Forest, which was key to his family. So key, in fact, that his mother was called Mary Arden. And it's these villages around Henley and Arden where there have been Shakespeares living there for years and years and years, all the way back, in fact, to the Domesday Book. Here's a little family tree that I've managed to work out. So this is the core of it, really. Here he is, William Shakespeare, the playwright. These are all his siblings here. There were 8 of them, and his parents were John Shakespeare and Mary Arden. And these are the two kind of forks that we're going to look at. So John Shakespeare and Richard Shakespeare and John, they go back and they are the Shakespeare clan, and they're from Snitterfield. And then there's Mary Arden and Robert Arden, who are the family that are named after the Arden Forest.
And this was a kind of one of the famous great forests of England, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the Forest of Arden was a really important part of Shakespeare's life. Well, he grew up there and his family were from there for generations. And even, he mentions it in his plays. So if you look at As You Like It, there's sections here. They say he is already in the Forest of Arden, and are many merry men with him, and there they live like the old Robin Hood of England.
Oh my goodness, that's great.
Yeah.
And that would have been, I guess, really familiar to his audience because they've known about this vast stretch of woodland in the middle of England.
Exactly. And it's interesting that they talk about Forest of Arden. It's both a place where it's a kind of refuge, people can go there and hide away, especially where all these families are very Catholic, but also it can be a place of freedom. And actually Shakespeare talks about that as well. He says, "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court?"
Correct. I'd much rather be among the oaks than among the blokes at court. What I'm fascinated by is when I was studying Shakespeare as a kid, I was studying through English classes, really, so it was all about the text and the drama. But what I was always quite interested in is where this stuff's coming from. So, like mentions of Arden, what was Arden like? So I just want to find out more about this area in the 16th century, how it shaped Shakespeare and his writing, and what was going on at that time.
Well, you are in the perfect place to find out about that. Just along the road, in fact, there is one of the oldest tithe barns in the area, and I'm going to send you there to find out those answers.
Brilliant. That would have been there when he was here, so that's good. So what about you? Where are you going?
Okay, so I'm going to go to Snitterfield, which was the family home of John Shakespeare and Richard Shakespeare, so the grandfather and the father, to find out how Mary Arden and young John Shakespeare met.
Okay, so we're doing the life and times of Shakespeare. You're doing the life, I'm doing the times. Let's go.
Let's go.
With a plan of action, we're parting ways through the Warwickshire countryside. Dan's first point of call is one of the most remarkable medieval buildings in the country, Middle Littleton Tithe Barn. The Shakespeares were so familiar with this landscape. Of course, it's changed enormously over the last 400 to 500 years, but if you know where to look, there are clues to what it was like and how it operated in their time. Helping us with the first piece of the puzzle is Joe Turney from the National Trust.
Hey, Joe.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
Well, very well, but all the better for seeing this extraordinary. This is a huge barn.
It's magnificent, isn't it?
Wow. I mean, that's a gigantic structure. When does it date from, do we think?
Well, we think it might be from the 13th or perhaps slightly later in the 14th century.
And it's connected with Evesham Abbey.
That's right, yeah. It's a tithe barn, which is a sort of a system whereby annually a tithe or a tax is collected to support the upkeep of that ecclesiastic institution.
So I guess the priests spend all day praying for the souls of their parishioners. It's the least they can do is just give them a tenth of their harvest.
You'd think so. You'd think so.
Payment for prayer. Lovely.
Indeed.
Right, let's go in and have a look. It's just a cathedral-like space, isn't it?
It really is.
Wow. So what's the idea? Farmers just, it was a bit disorganised. Just bring in a few bushels and stack them in a corner, or how does it work?
Well, it tends to be done on an annual basis. So the word tithe, from the Old English for one-tenth of your produce or your income. Most people in the medieval period when this barn is constructed are, of course, working in farms. So they tend to give a tenth of their crop. Now, when you've got such a wide rural hinterland as we do here, you need a lot of space to store all of those crops. So probably around harvest time, this barn possibly full right to the ceiling.
Wow. And the monks are able to come and, sustain themselves all through the winter and all through, the rest of the year, just with all the food in here.
Absolutely, and it's possible that they also sold off parts of it. It's all about generating income as well as supporting themselves through just means of eating the crops.
So this would have been a feature of life in England, right across the country, right up until the Reformation, in the 16th century, just before Shakespeare's life, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. This was a very common practice. As I say, it goes back to the early medieval period. So something that Shakespeare would have been intimately familiar with and sort of, passed through generations and generations of history.
What happens then when the Reformation goes on? Because we don't still do tithing today, do we?
No, well, tithing actually exists in various forms and guises right through up until the 20th century. But by Shakespeare's time, 30 years before he's born, of course, around about that anyway, we get the Reformation and the confiscation of all of that church wealth and their assets. And quite often the Crown will seize these assets and redistribute them to civic authorities perhaps, or sometimes private individuals. And so the tithes remain as they are at this period in Shakespeare's lifetime, but they go to fund slightly different things. And what's really interesting is that we know about Stratford tithes. The Corporation of Stratford, who are granted the tithes at the dissolution, then start to lease them to private individuals. So it becomes a private enterprise. And what's really remarkable is that Shakespeare himself, in the early 17th century, actually ends up investing a portion of his own wealth into the Stratford tithes, generating a source of income for himself.
So they're still collecting tithes, but it's no longer going to the local abbey, it's just going to the local tithe reception.
Pretty much.
And individuals can just buy shares in it?
Pretty much, in the case
Wow.
of Stratford, certainly.
Shakespeare's world is being turned upside down by this. He actually ends up benefiting from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's probably in part due to his intimate knowledge of farming practices throughout his lifetime, and of course his business credentials throughout his lifetime that allow him to make these investments.
So even though we think of Shakespeare as this kind of city boy who's working on the mean streets of London, but he comes back here and gets involved in the trade that he knows best.
Absolutely. Trade he was raised with.
Yeah.
So, farming played an important role in Shakespeare's world, and later on, he even invested his profits from writing plays in London back into the local Stratford tithes. Shakespeare's parents, John Shakespeare and Mary Arden, were both raised in farming families. I'm keen to find out what kind of life they led in their early years, and how did they meet? I'm hoping I can find the answers in Snitterfield, a village just 3 miles outside Stratford. This was where Shakespeare's father, John Shakespeare, grew up. To help me get to the bottom of it all, I'm meeting Professor Carol Rutter, a Shakespearean expert from the University of Warwick.
So Carol, I've been looking at Shakespeare's family tree, and I have to confess, it's been a bit of a minefield. There are Shakespeares everywhere, there are all sorts of different spellings, there seem to be Ardens everywhere as well. Please, can you enlighten me as to a bit of clarity in this matter?
Well, I think what we can say is, what we know is that the land over here that we're looking out at was farmed by the Shakespeares, by the father of John, Richard Shakespeare. He had 2 sons. The elder son was going to take the tenancy of the farm, leaving John to find his own way in the world. But the Shakespeares also were tenant farmers who rented their farmland from a man called Robert Arden of Wilmscote, who eventually had a daughter named Mary, who was going to marry into the Shakespeares, bringing these 2 families of John Shakespeare, Mary Arden, together. Both of these families were farming families. The Ardens owned land. He was described as a 100-acre husbandman. So that means that he was of a lower status from a yeoman who owned land and owned a small estate, but he was higher than a laborer. He was certainly not part of the aristocracy, but he did have 100 acres or thereabouts that he was going to farm. Nobody in an age where everything had to be done by hand could farm 100 acres on their own. So what he did was he parceled out parts of the farm to tenants, and the farm over on this side, on the Snitterfield side, then became part of that tenancy that was being farmed by Richard Shakespeare, and then after that, his son Henry.
Can you tell me how, Mary Arden and John Shakespeare got together? Was Mary Arden marrying down then?
Not necessarily at all. On John's side of the family, because he was the second son, he needed to find a trade that he was going to be able to work his way in the world. He's been apprenticed to a glover. On the Arden side, Mary Arden was the youngest of 5 daughters born to Robert Arden, who was the last daughter living at home when her father died. She rode all the way 30 miles to Worcester to prove her father's will in 1556. We therefore imagine that she might have been of age. So she was 21 years of age in 1556, and probably a year later, in 1557, married John Shakespeare. And it may have been a real move upward for her to move off a farm into town, where she might have had servants. She moved from a house that was just an open hearth, open hall architecture into a townhouse that had separate bedrooms, not a sleeping platform as she'd been used to out on the farm. So in terms of her family status, being one of the extended Arden clan, it was called the Forest of Arden. Of course, the name meant something in this territory, but in terms of her status, she might have been moving into a different kind of category of family name, even at the same time that she was moving into a different status of town living as against remote farm living out there in, notionally, the wilderness.
Sadly, the house where John Shakespeare was born no longer survives, but there are a few buildings still dotted around the village which were standing in the 1530s. A stone's throw from the church is this delightful barn, a glimpse into the Snitterfield which local boy John Shakespeare would have known.
It's wonderful, isn't it? It's amazing that so much of 15th, 16th century building has survived. Now, if you look beyond the modern additions, so the bricks wouldn't have been there in 1530, and neither would the tile roof have been there. But if you actually look at the structure, the timber framing, the oak timber framing, shows how early modern buildings were literally pinned together out of oak. So here you see pins that are holding all of the structure together so that a building was literally framed and then put on site, you know, like Lego. It also explains why in 1599 in London, the players could literally take apart the theatre and take it across the river and rebuild it as the Globe using all of the timber framing.
Wow, what a lovely place to live, you know, in the centre of Snitterfield, looking out over the Warwickshire
Yes,
fields.
and indeed, of course, the road that we have going past here that takes us right back up to the church is the King's Road. So he would have seen all of the world pass,
Hustle and bustle,
in front of his house.
Having got to grips with the Shakespeare family and their farming background, it's time for me to head back to our base at Salford Hall and compare notes with Dan.
So Dan, what did you think?
Well, that was great, wasn't it? I mean, just the scale of that barn was extraordinary. It's a reminder of just the centrality of land and food and gathering harvest and the importance, of course, of the church within that system. Most people's lives was all about getting food in those barns and surviving the winter.
Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare's parents, Mary Arden and John Shakespeare, were farmers, and that was their lives.
So he'd have known this world of farming, of food, of rural life. But what's really interesting as well is I was reminded there, Shakespeare is being born into a world that is just transformed. There's a revolution going on in religion. The church had dominated this landscape spiritually, but also practically, organising how food is distributed and things like that. And that has all suddenly changed. It's one of the great discontinuities of English history. And so this world is in upheaval.
It is. And I'm going to go and send you, there are two amazing sites near here which will enlighten you about these kind of issues that are going on. Evesham Abbey, or the remains of Evesham Abbey.
Well, that's because that was connected with the type. I want to go and check that out, see what's left of it, yeah.
So check that out. And then also you're going to go and have a look at Coton Court, which was it was the home of one of the big families of the time, the Throckmorton family, who became a bit more famous with their involvement in the gunpowder plot a bit later on.
Because this area was quite infamous for big old-fashioned Catholic families that clung to their Catholic religion and yeah, a lot of involvement, a lot of adjacency to the gunpowder plot.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of upheaval around, and actually there's a big period of upheaval for the Shakespeare family because John and Mary, newly married, for some reason uproot and move to Stratford-upon-Avon.
So they leave this rural life behind in Snitterfield and become townsfolk.
They do, and I'm going to go and have a look at what it was like.
Dan's heading to Evesham, a pretty market town just across the border in Worcestershire. In the medieval period and into Henry VIII's reign, Evesham was known as a great ecclesiastical centre, home to one of the largest abbeys in Europe.
I've come now to what was once one of the most vibrant and important monastic sites in England. Now, little remains of it. There's some stones here on the ground that lay out where the chapter house would once have stood. Here at Evesham, which was an abbey that Shakespeare, or certainly his forebears, would have been very familiar with. The community of monks would have gathered here every day to listen to a lesson of St. Benedict being read out by the abbot. They were Benedictine monks, and you would come through here from their beautiful, well-lit, almost round chapter house. You can still see a very nice one at Westminster Abbey in London, which managed to survive the Reformation, through this beautifully carved arch into the cloisters. And the reason there's not much left now, and the reason that this would have been a ruin even by the time young William Shakespeare was born, because of the Reformation. In the late 1530s, in fact here it was January 1540, Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries. He sent his men, his commissioners, out to 900 religious sites across England, friaries, monasteries, nunneries, to take possession of them, to make sure that their income became his income, their land, his land. And what began was one of the most radical transformations in the last 1,000 years of English history. Vast, powerful, wealthy religious sites, religious centres like this one, were stripped of their valuables. Their roofs were taken off. The monks, the nuns were put on pensions and let go. And slowly, the site became a quarry. Land was sold off, local people came in to get bits of cut stone to use for their building projects. All the houses at Evesham will be made from a stone that was originally probably here in this monastery. And this cloister here, which would have been one of the beautiful enclosed squares, grass in the middle, colonnaded walkways around each side, an architectural style inherited from the great Roman villas of 1500 years before. This was left to rack and ruin, except for the one bit that remains upstanding, which this bell tower, this clock tower here, was pretty much the last thing to be built here at the Abbey. It was built in the 1530s, just before it got dissolved. And for some reason, it's been left. Some people say it's because the locals rather liked having a clock prominently displayed high above the town. But for whatever reason, that now is almost all that's left of this monastic complex. It gives you a little hint of just how magnificent it must have been.
John and Mary Shakespeare would have no doubt been shocked that much of the world which shaped their childhood was literally being reduced to a pile of rubble. But what did it mean for their children? What about the childhood of their son William Shakespeare himself? Where was he born and what shaped his early years? Luckily, there is a treasure trove of information in the heart of Stratford-upon-Avon. I'm meeting Dr. Paul Edmondson at the very house where William was born.
Paul, hi.
Alice, welcome to Shakespeare's
Hi.
birthplace
So nice
garden.
to meet you.
Well, welcome.
So
It's
great to be here.
Oh,
Wow.
flowers mentioned in the place. Look, the Shakespeare rose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Shakespeare Rose, how beautiful.
Save thou my rose, in it thou art my all. Sonnet 108. Rosemary for remembrance. The marigold that goes to bed with the sun and with him rises weeping. Isn't that marvellous?
Yes.
He knew a lot about plants and flowers, did our Shakespeare, but very different in his time, more like a working backyard
Right,
then, full
okay.
of industry and livestock.
Well, here we are at the birthplace. This is where he was born.
Let's go and look inside.
Let's have a look.
Alice, welcome to Shakespeare's birthplace.
Wow.
I first came here when I was 14 and it bowled me over.
Oh, wow, how exciting.
This is a room which John Shakespeare, Shakespeare's father, would have been especially proud of. It shows social climbing, it shows his rise in social status. Just come from up the road as an agricultural labourer from Snitterfield, and he's making it in life. He comes here, establishes himself on Henley Street by 1552. He's fined for having a muck heap outside the house. And in 1557, he marries Mary Arden from nearby Wilmcote. And so they move in to this house and they start to establish a family.
So why do they move? What's the big move? What's the big upheaval from the countryside?
Business and self-improvement. And that's the key phrase for anything we look at on Shakespeare's life. That rise, always that social rise, the earning more money, the wanting to do well for yourself. And his father taught him how to do that in this very house. And this bed, which we see downstairs, really odd to have a bed downstairs, but this was part of the social rise. This is what you wanted as your best bed, your guest room, and you wanted people to see it as they passed the house. And there you are looking at it, and I'm thinking about beds in Shakespeare's plays. I'm thinking about how the culmination of one of the greatest tragedies ever written, Othello, ends on a bed, the tragic lading of the bed as he's murdered Desdemona, strangled her, smothered her in the bed, and he himself dies upon a kiss on top of her. And beds in Measure for Measure, and also that ends well when people are tricked into sleeping with the wrong people, the so-called bed trick. So not only a sign of social wealth, but a great theatrical part of Shakespeare's own imagination as he went on to make it himself.
So what's this room we find ourselves in here?
This is the parlour.
This looks cosy.
Parlare, to speak. This is the main family room, the main room of the day for the midday meal, which was dinner, which was a big dinner. It kept you going throughout the rest of the day because day started so early. He attended the local King Edward VI grammar school, and he would have gone there probably from 6 o'clock in the morning in summer, 7 o'clock in the morning in winter. He'd have been ready for a good dinner come midday, and here they all gathered. The family. So Shakespeare had 5 brothers and sisters. Anne and Richard and Gilbert and Joan, and then eventually Edmund. And here, of course, he would have come back and told them what he'd been studying at school during the day, because education really, really mattered. And if your father is as aspiring as John Shakespeare, you want your son to do well for himself. So he sends him to the local grammar school, where Shakespeare learned that language is power.
Well, I just like to think of all the Shakespeares sitting here, all of those little children. John Shakespeare just come back from, being an important civic person in the town, making big decisions about Stratford, coming back with, reporting back on what he's been up to.
His mouth full of news, as we hear in As You Like It.
Oh, really? Yeah. Great, well, onwards.
And this is the Glover's Workshop.
Oh, wow. So this is where it all happened.
Well, John Shakespeare was a widower, which means he made white leather. So he had access to some of the town's tanneries, and he's bringing this back in plentiful supply. The white leather up there, for example, that was what a widower did.
So he moved into Stratford from the countryside, and he set up shop here as a glover.
As a widower and as a glover.
Okay, sure.
And a glover was a popular trade in Stratford. People wanted gloves for working purposes, so like practical gloves for falconry and birding and other sports and labour, but then extremely fine gloves. And white leather was the most expensive, of course. Different kinds of animal skin, lots of different references to leather in Shakespeare's plays. So, genius grows often in humble origins. Ben Jonson, Shakespeare's contemporary, playwright, his father was a bricklayer. So John Shakespeare's father made gloves, he made white leather, but he also dealt in wool. The basket over there. Very significantly in wool. He was fined for illegal wool dealing, but he was making a lot of money from it. And when the floorboards of this room were uplifted in the 19th century, they found traces of wool under the floorboards.
Oh, really? What was they doing there?
Well, secretly hidden, one supposes, not wanting to be found.
So was wool, tell me about the wool trade in this area. That must have been pretty important.
Yes, it was the most significant industry of the whole county and of the whole country.
And why was that?
Well, because it was extremely lucrative. People needed it to make cloth. You had to be buried in a woolen shroud, so all of this was helping the woolen industry, and there was money to be made there. One traditional story about Shakespeare's father is that he rises to a certain pitch of success and then loses everything. Another version of that is he rises to a pitch of success, but the illegal wool dealing keeps him going, even when he's not in the town council anymore, which is quite interesting, and I think it has a ring of truth for me.
So up we go, upstairs.
Into a family bedroom. So what, seven people living in this house, members of the family, by the time Shakespeare is 16.
Gosh.
Above this room was where the apprentices slept.
Oh, really? So this was both a house and a workshop?
So this would have been a family bedroom, and then upstairs in the attic is where you put the apprentices.
What are we looking at
here? Well, this is the so-called birth room, it being the master bedroom. And of course, the birthplace is an international icon, really. And we're interested, aren't we, in points of origin. So when our Victorian ancestors saved this house from just going into private ownership through public subscription, Charles Dickens among them, one of the fundraisers, it was because they wanted a national memorial to Shakespeare and the point of origin. So for many years, people have been visiting this house, really from as early as the late 1660s, I'd say, coming to Stratford. In those days, you could be shown around by descendants of Shakespeare's sister, who lived in the house next door.
Wow.
Yeah, so, the great-great-nephews were showing people the birthplace.
So they were showing around their great-uncles. They were using it's their great-uncle's house, and they were
and an income stream. Thank you very much. But that's what they did. So this is really the iconic room.
So this is the birthing room.
It's called the
birth room. So this is the room where William Shakespeare was born.
By tradition, this is what we say of this room.
Wow! Here it is. This is where it all started.
Yeah.
In the next programme, Dan and I dig deeper into how the religious turmoil of the 16th century played a crucial part in William Shakespeare's life. How did it affect his family, his schooling, and what about his writing? We'll be heading to Warwickshire's historic gems. Dan will visit one of the great Catholic houses of the Tudor age, and I'll be exploring some long-lost wall paintings which have been covered up for centuries. And I've even found an unexpected surprise right here in the attics of Salford Hall. Join us in part 2 for more secrets from Shakespeare's Stratford.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.